I wanted to start by thanking Save the Children for this incredible event. We are aware that education is critical, and it is a human right as well as a child's right. Um, and it's sadly one that has been very impacted by COVID-19 pandemic. So over a year, the lives of many children have dramatically changed with the fast spreading of coronavirus all around the globe. And while it's safe to say that we're all under the same storm, we're definitely not all in the same boat. The measures to combat the fast spreading virus have included strict lockdowns, closures, which included also school closures in many, many countries. And while some countries and governments were very quick in seeking methods to ensure that education continued to be sustained, be that through the implementation of remote education, be that through access to several platforms, still over 1 billion children are still at risk of falling behind. And while this number is from UNICEF, and while it is alarming, it's definitely not surprising, because even prior to the pandemic, children's learning was in crisis. Half of 10-year-olds across the world in middle and low income countries were unable already to understand a simple written sentence. And more than 250 million children are out of school. So the pandemic has acted as a catalyst of those already existing inequities. It has been a catalyst to hidden school children, particularly in poorer settings, particularly hard. Sorry. And for more than 168 million children globally, the schools have been closed for a full year. 2/3 of those countries are in Latin America and Caribbean, the region I worked for over the last 10 years. Now I'm working globally. And what we see is that this Latin American schools affected 98 million school children. Furthermore, around 214 million children globally, that is 1 in 7 children globally, have missed more than 3/4 of their in-person learning. And the most vulnerable children and those unable to access remote learning are obviously at an increased risk of never returning to a classroom because of those conditions. And some of them are even forced to go into child marriage, early marriage, child labor, child sexual exploitation. And according to the latest data from UNESCO, more than 888 million children worldwide continue to face disruptions to their education due to the partial or full closures. Many of those children are unable to access those platforms, as Vika's very beautifully said, as a result of a digital divide that preceded the pandemic as well. Many of those world's children, particularly those in poorer settings, they do not have internet access, they don't have TVs, they don't have computers, they don't have mobile phones or even radios at home. And even those who have, and I'm not talking only about poor countries or developing countries, but in countries where you have higher income or middle income, you still have children that face the same issues. Maybe you have one computer for the whole family. Maybe you have only one cell phone for the whole family. And dividing the tasks between the needs for the parents to work and the needs for the children to study with single instruments have been one of the biggest challenges. Sorry. While 53% of the households globally are connected to the internet, the share of students with no internet access at home varies from about 15% in Western Europe and North America to as high as 80% in sub-Saharan Africa. In Latin America, a large number of children are leaving now schools because either they can't access the resources or they need to start working to provide at home for the family. And Latin America is definitely not alone. What UNICEF has done a study, and what their findings include is that more than 90% of the countries have adopted digital and are broadcast remote learning policies, but 60% only have done so for pre-primary education. Those are children in need of socialization, in need of several tools to really grow to their full potential. 31% of school children worldwide, about 463 million children, cannot be reached by those internet or mobile, internet or broadcast. Internet-based remote learning policies, either because they don't have the technology as assets at home or because they were not necessarily targeted by those adopted policies. And globally, 3 out of 4 students who cannot be reached by remote learning policies, they come from rural areas or some of the most poor settings in the countries that we are addressing. And in addition to missed education opportunities, school closures have a devastating consequence to the children's well-being and the learning process. Children all around the world are facing this loss in socialization, a very, very important aspect of learning. They're facing grieving processes from lost COVID. They're facing struggles within the household for added stress as a result of pandemic losses, as a result of losing jobs, as a result of economic conditions. And all of those losses, including also specifically the loss in social emotional learning opportunities, most of them being locked inside in the house, with most of the conditions, what we see a lot is children being locked in very violent households or very detrimental areas for their own learning needs. And what we see is that children who are already vulnerable are at a higher level of vulnerability now, including children with special needs, because they are not having access to those therapies they need to really reach their full potential, to girls, and we are having a huge divide now, a huge loss now for the campaign that has been done on equality for rights, because a lot of those children, a lot of those girls are at a higher risk. And the majority of the school children worldwide rely on their schools in many cases as a place where they can interact with their peers safely, as a place where they can find and seek support from trusted adults, as a place where they can have access to health, immunization services, and even a nutritious meal. So the longer schools remain closed, the longer schools are cut off from those critical elements of childhood. Vulnerable children are as I said, is an even higher risk. Over 11 million girls may not go back to school after the COVID pandemic. And this alarming number, as I said, not only addresses and threatens decades of work on making progress towards gender equality, but also puts girls around the world at risk for adolescent pregnancy, early and forced marriage, violence, and abuse. More broadly, the disruption and the stress caused by COVID-19 pandemic presents a significant risk for increased family violence, including child abuse, even in settings where this was not a reality. As a parent myself, I can say that the stresses of being joined together in the same household, with no support from schools in many situations, with the double or sometimes triple and sometimes even quadruple workforces, work journeys, have definitely placed a lot of abuse, a lot of burden over parents and over children. And the children, specifically younger ones, are facing higher levels of stress, depression, anger, and other related issues of mental health. And although another issue that we see is that the rates of reported abuse have declined, which is not to say that children are not being abused. It is just to say that the schools and the adults and the trusted adults around the child who would be able to spot this abuse and intervene properly are not there. The pandemic has reduced the contact with those mandated reporters. Public health organizations are claiming that a lot of as a result of the safety measures created by the pandemic, those workers, those social workers that were there to protect children are no longer available as they were. Specifically, and I have a child here that is participating on our event. Sorry about that. But particularly children, the lack of the social worker systems that were already really stretched thin before the pandemic are now at an even higher rate of lack of access to children. And specifically those families that were more vulnerable before, families that had some sort of abuse behavior before, they are now experiencing even more stress as a result of economic instability, unanticipated job loss, and other economic downturns really caused by the pandemic. And lockdowns are affecting developing countries a lot more than developed countries in more than one way. It is important to understand that those tensions from job losses, the hunger, poverty, and lack of access to trusted adults are significantly heightening the ability of children to learn. As Ramal was saying before, children are forgetting what they learned before. And part of this is a result of the stress added to them. The lack of a well-being in their own households is actually impacting their learning potential. A study in Hong Kong has shown, for instance, that reduction of income was significantly associated with severe and very severe cases of abuse against children, physical abuse against children. And so were job loss and large income reduction. Exposure to physical and partner violence, intimate partner violence between parents is also a very strong predictor of a lot of different types of maltreatments. And we know that one or more ACEs, four or more ACEs, which are adverse childhood experiences, they definitely add to a potential of increased depression in the future, increased lack of stability at home, increased loss opportunities in the future. And the COVID pandemic has severely added to this place as a significant ACE. And to add to all of those child protection concerns, we know that children are now at a more higher rate for increased exploitation as well. In settings of economic struggles, children are being pushed to work in even more dire situations than before. Sorry about that. And a substantial portion of those abuses are committed and perpetrated by children, normally outside of the pandemic, by persons that are known to children, which are even stronger now that children are in close quarters with their own perpetrators and abusers in many situations. So the school closures are also preventing abuse to be discovered and harming the prevention of those children, the prevention efforts in taking care of those children. And also just even more concerning is that schools were already not ready to deal with abuse and exploitation in schools. The many schools around the world still lie on several myths regarding child abuse. Many school members and many adults as a whole think that children lie about abuse, when we know that false accusations and false allegations amount to only 4% of cases, and most of them occurring during divorce settings. A lot of us as adults have the obligation, and I love that that is the focus of the Save the Children campaign. It's believing children. We need to start believing children, because if we work and start every action of ours by believing children and what they say, and that they are the experts on themselves, we are much better prepared to respond properly. But even now, countries that had a robust child protection practices. And I would like to name, for instance, the UK, the United Kingdom, that have statutory guidances that inform and let us know and dictate what schools need to do in order to protect children in education settings, are now coming a lot under scrutiny for several Good Samaritan pages that emerged. I don't know if you have heard of Everyone's Invited, which is a major movement in the UK related to peer-on-peer abuse in schools, to the lack of proper responses in many school settings across the UK. And this has spanned to other countries as well, with children constantly mentioning the horrific abuse they suffered in schools, as well as the poor response that led to this after this disclosure in schools. And this has also created already, Everyone's United happened in March, and this has created a ripple effect across the world already. We already see school children in Malaysia coming out, being brave in reporting the lack of effective action in schools. We also heard of many schools in Brazil, in Colombia, and other countries coming out and saying how poorly the school's practices are to keeping children safe. And even in Chennai, India, lately, that, if I'm not mistaken, last week, we had several instances of inappropriate sexual behavior from the part of a teacher that ended up in a Good Samaritan page on Twitter and other social media blogs, because children are in dire need of being heard. And we are still not heard, and children are still not heard. So considering all the severity of the situation of school children, a few really critical recommendations would come very handy for countries. For those countries already vaccinating, it would be critical to start vaccinating teachers and school staff with a high priority at this point. However, we understand that the vaccination pace and the spread of new variants is really putting those actions in check. So we understand that this is going to be a movement for a while, with partial closures and or hybrid mode for a while in schools. As such, we need to be really creative as not relying to a single method of dissemination. Let's not rely only and solely on videos. Let's not rely only and solely on school books. Let's not rely only and solely at aiming at teacher. Let's include parents. Let's include other stakeholders. Let's include other media. Let's include other means of participation. Additionally, expanding access to the internet and other digital solutions for children all around the world, it's one key priority we should take now to reduce vulnerabilities. And combined with the subsidized free access to the internet and other methods of dissemination of digital solutions to the families, we urge countries to also develop child protection safety materials in the languages of the child of the country, so they understand how to navigate those systems safely and effectively. But also reaching out to the vulnerable families is critically important, is paramount at this point. Understanding the difficulties in balancing work and child rearing, plus helping children getting their education, achieving their education potential, is critical. We understand many families that are doing this task at helping children are illiterate, posing even more challenges to helping those children thrive. So reaching out to families that were already vulnerable before the pandemic is paramount as well. And we were talking about how difficult it is for some social workers and government agencies to really reach those families at a time of pandemic. But let's use those same technological solutions. Let's adopt some innovative methods to reaching out to those families. So schools that are talking to people, to children and to parents, Make sure that the child's well-being and mental health are also evaluated and analyzed. Let's reach out to virtual home visits by government agencies. This has been done in England on the early onset of the pandemic with very critical success, very important successes. It is also important to use the social media and reach children. So use TikTok, Snapchat, and other solutions that children are now resorting to. So to bring messages to reduce the likelihood of them being exploited specifically online, as we understand the upsurge of the pandemic also came with an upsurge of online harm to children. Some professionals reported that some children, including and families, were actually readier to engage in a home setting, in a virtual connection, as opposed to going to school and talking to the agency or to the school in question. Also, schools are once again a critical partner during and following the pandemic. As students return to their classrooms, they will definitely need a lot of support to readjust to the routine, to readjust and catch up on their learning. So mental health in this return to the classes is and should be a critical priority. And in the reopening plans for the schools, it's important that we provide a single unique support to children based on their needs. In particular, as I said, mental health and protection measures in schools are urgent. So those schools that did not have a child protection plan, that did not have a team prepared to take on any messages or any support to those children, are now even more needed. So for the schools who are closed, we highly recommend them creating the platforms, creating the structures to properly respond to mental health issues, to abuse, and to well-being of children. At the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children, we have an education portal with several tools for school on how to keep children safe in education. We highly recommend everyone. The website is called adportal.icmac.org. And once I finish speaking, I'll put the link on the chat so everyone can access it. And it is very, very important that schools start working on developing social emotional programs. There are a myriad of social emotional programs that can be easily adapted in many realities. Specifically now during the pandemic, to help them cope with potential losses to COVID, potential economic losses, and potential mental health issues that have emerged. Children who feel supported are the ones who will thrive in education. It is critical for schools to create internal policies on how to handle those disclosures properly, teaching the staff on how to react to any disclosures that come, that children bring to them. And specifically, it's important now, given the COVID pandemic, that school members are handling trauma effectively. So having a trauma-informed care policy is critical at this point. It's specifically when we're talking about children who have experienced ACEs in childhood, that have experienced trauma, they're more likely to act out on certain behaviors at home, maybe causing peer-on-peer abuse. So it is critical that we create also policies for dealing with those peer-on-peer abuses, because in this instance, we have two victims, the one who harmed and the one who was harmed. It is important to create and apply codes of conduct throughout the school members, including staff, teachers, parents, as well as students. And it is critical that we start minimizing those toxic behaviors that have been fostering those movements that I mentioned across the globe. Also, having the burden of the decision on what to do in cases of abuse, in cases of trauma on a single person, usually the head, is extremely overwhelming. Thus, we strongly recommend schools creating internal response teams of multidisciplinary nature. So we have more eyes on the case, we have more perspectives on the case, and we have more gender parity on the situation analysis, so we can properly and effectively respond to those issues. It is critical also to develop multiple pathways for reporting, because if specifically creating anonymized pathways for reporting, because in situations that was mentioned in the Everyone's United movement, in Malaysia, in Brazil, what we constantly hear is that they did not hear us. They did not act on what we brought to them. So it is important for us. And with that, I really want to thank you all for being here, for listening to me and to this beautiful initiative from Save the Children. And I would like to finish this by saying, the moment we start listening and believing what children really are saying is the moment we are acting as trusted adults, is the moment that we are being a part of the solution and not a part of the problem. So I would like to thank you all and remind us all that we are as trusted adults for someone. We are all trusted adults for someone. And as trusted adults, we all share the responsibility to protect children, to help children, and to let them thrive in education. Thank you very much.